All right, so we're out here doing our sidewalk forms, and to get started, I wanted to show you what it should look like after you get your first 2 stakes in the ground and get your string line attached. And I'm going to show you how to go ahead and do this. All right, step 1 after you have your grade stake made is you're going to come out here and you're going to pound your grade stake into the ground very firmly. The height doesn't necessarily matter as long as it's above 6 inches. All right, something like that. But you're basically trying to get a stake in the ground, plumb up and down, 10 feet away from the road is the first stake that you're going to install on this project. After you get this stake installed, we're going to hook onto it, and we're going to come down here and we're going to install another stake exactly 24 feet to the outside of the stake. This stake should also be approximately 10 feet off the road this way. Okay, so this is the second stake that you would install on your project, and it should be about 10 feet off the road, something like this. Okay, so that doesn't necessarily matter the idea too much, like within inches. It just needs to be relative, about 10 feet away from the road, so our sidewalk that we're going to make here is parallel with our road. So step 1 is put that stake in the ground. Step 2 is put this stake in the ground. Now you can see that I have my string line in a crazy configuration here. The reason I'm doing that is these are called gauge blocks. So how I set this up and why I did this, I'm going to explain. The reason I'm doing this is I'm going to pound more stakes in the ground every 4 feet on center. And I want them perfectly in line with this string line. So we often do stuff like this. We put a gauge block, and then when we install the next stakes, we're measuring off our string line to install these stakes. That way the stakes in the middle don't push the string line left and right. All right, so I'll show you how to do that in a minute here. All right, step 2, after you have this stake in the ground, it's 10 feet off the road, it's good and firm. You have your other stake down here, exactly 24 feet apart, and it's 10 feet off the road. We're gonna now set up our string lines and our gauge block. All right, so to do this, we don't need to put a finish nail in our stakes. We're gonna need to tie our carpenter's knot again. So we're gonna take our string line, tie our carpenter's knot, put it on our stake, and we're gonna wrap it around the stake about 3 times like so. And we're gonna take our string line on this side of our stake. We're gonna bring it down here to the other stake that we have established 24 feet away. All right, now this knot we're gonna do like this. We're gonna make sure we're on this side of the stake again. We bring our string line on relatively tight. I pull it. That's why the stakes need to be in the ground so tight, so you can pull your string line real tight and maintain your 24-foot distance. Now I'm gonna tie it like this, okay? So I can do multiple knots like that so it doesn't come apart, but they all will easily come apart and not get knotted. Now the next thing I need to do is I'm going to put my gauge blocks in. And the reason I'm putting my gauge blocks in is so I can measure off my string line and not push my line while I'm working. Okay, so how we do that is we're going to pull this out and pound a temporary stake next to this. All right, just like so, gently into the ground. What I'm trying to do, I want it the 1.5 inch way, so the next stake is going to be 1.5 inches away from the line. All right, so I'm going to go down here to this end and do the same thing. Put my gauge block in and tap it in gently. Now I can start installing my stakes in the middle. And this way that way my stakes are staying as straight and plumb up as down as I can possibly make them against my line. That's the whole name of the game. So there's a couple different ways of doing this. Sometimes I hook my tape measure on. I'm doing it 4 feet on center. So I want the center of my stake, just like it says, to be in the center of the stake at 4 feet. So what I do is I'll come down here to 4 feet. I put a little mark on my string line so I can use both my hands. In construction, we're often working by ourselves, so we have to make do with what we have. Someone had put a stake in there, so I'm going to fill that in like that so I can start all over again. Now I'm going to put this stake in the ground at the 4 foot mark, 1.5 inches away from my line is the plan. So I get my tape measure out and I figure out about where 1.5 is to get it started. I line up the center of my stake with the little mark I made on the string line. and then I go ahead and get started. And again, I want this, we're gonna saw the tops of all these off eventually, but my goal is to try to get my steak as plumb up and down as I possibly can. These steaks are a little rough. They have the cut only one way, so it drives the steak in an angle. So you want your steaks as plumb up and down as you can, so it's better to cut the angle both directions here. And maintain it 1 1/2 inches as perfectly as you can. Forming concrete is not delicate work. You have to get it perfectly accurate for it to turn out right. And it has to be super firm so that the concrete doesn't blow the forms out while we're pouring it. All right, so I want my steaks plumb up and down, 1 1/2 inches away, and also 4 feet to the center approximately, okay? Then I'll go down and I'll put my next steak at 8 feet. So again, I'll come down here, I'll mark 8 feet, and I'll repeat the same thing at the 12 foot. So we're gonna go 4 foot, 8 foot, 12 foot, 16 foot. That's how many steaks you should have, and you're gonna keep doing the same thing as you travel down your line. When you're all done, you should have a row of perfectly straight plumb steaks. The idea then is you're gonna fasten a 2x4 to those steaks perfectly level. Then we'll saw the top of the steaks off. All right?